Hey, what's going on, guys? Boo from Distilling. We are talking about our second part of the Distilling 101 series recipe creation here today. So last week we talked about certain ratios, we talked about ingredient bases to create that recipe, and we also had a really informative section on different resources that you can use to help you sort of create that recipe. If you haven't watched that video, I would definitely implore you to. You can find that link here. It's probably wrong. It's probably here. Anyways, one of the two. You're definitely more than welcome to watch this video. And then at the end of this video, you're going to see a card which will have a quick link right to the first part of this video. But let's get into the second portion of our Distilling 101 recipe creation guide. We have two more topics to cover in this part of the series. That's going to be our tips and tricks, as well as basically what I'm going to call final touches, what basically will sort of round out our recipe. So far in number one of this series, we've been able to make a good recipe and start a good base. But if we're gonna make that recipe feasible to, let's call it this way, let's say mass produce that recipe. Let's say we have a distillery and we want to be able to market and have people buy as much of that certain recipe as we can. Or maybe you're a home distiller and you just want to treat your friends and family to a good batch. Well, that's what part two is going to be all about. So we're going to get right into the tips and tricks section of this video. Our first tip we can give you is, and I know it sounds pretty obvious here, but remember that your recipes will be trial and error. It's a very rare scenario to where you would be able to create a recipe first time and have it turn out good. We're close to the beer brewing craft, and this pretty much, as far as I know, doesn't really happen in beer brewing. There's no such thing as creating a recipe out of just your butt and making it like extremely good. It takes trial and error to get there. We're in a much more forgiving craft in distilling. There is less room for error, but it's pretty hard to create that base spirit and have it come out amazing first try. It can come out good, but good and amazing, we're at two different levels here. Remember, there's always room for improvement. And that's where, regardless if we're liking our first batch or not, trial and error is going to keep us from being average to above average, okay? My first ever bourbon I did use a recipe I found through Barley and Hops Brewing, a really good YouTube channel, and it turned out phenomenal. This was like a top shelf bourbon. I had so much fun creating this recipe and drinking this recipe. However, this was cheating in a way, right? I took a recipe that someone had already cultivated through who knows how many runs to create. And so yeah, it turned out great. I didn't really see much room for improvement. It was an awesome bourbon. If we're starting from scratch, chances of that happening are, I think, lower. You can easily create a rum base through just plain molasses and maybe a little bit of sugar and some yeast and have it turn out like your average rum. But do you want an average rum, or do you want like a top shelf rum, really your rum? Do you want to add things into that rum to make it your own? Remember, there's so many different types of molasses. Have you ever tried that molasses with maybe a Thai-inspired molasses to change it out and see really what benefits you there? There's a lot of things we can always do to potentially improve our recipe. So for those of you creating a recipe and you do your batch and you don't like it, just remember to not give up. It's trial and error. For those of you creating a recipe, first batch, and it comes out good, just remember not to settle. We want to continue to improve upon our recipe, and the way we do that is going to be our trial and error. So give yourself time, give yourself patience, don't expect too much out of your recipe, and don't settle as well with your recipe. Continue to improve upon it. Try different oak spirals, different oak toast levels in your whiskeys, even if you like them. Try different ingredients that may benefit your whiskey, rum, tequila. It doesn't really matter the spirit, it's universal. Continue to play with that recipe and potentially improve upon it. That's part of the craft. We're very in line with, say, cooks and people creating their own dishes. Adding one ingredient different can completely change our flavor and make it our own signature dish in just a simple ingredient. So remember to play trial and error. Another tip I'd recommend to you guys is, again, this is probably without saying, but try to do small batches. If you have the ability to, any still you get from us, if you have an internal heating element, you have half your max capacity that you can work with as a minimum batch. So rather than get a 16-gallon batch, remember you can do 8. Rather than a 26-gallon batch, remember you can do a 13. Start a little bit smaller. If you're not using internal elements and you have a hot plate or a propane stove, you really don't have a minimum. So even if you have like a 26-gallon still, I'd recommend just starting with like a 5-gallon batch to test out that recipe before you go too far into it. There's distilleries out there with, 1,000+ gallon stills, much more plus gallon stills, and none of them, as far as I would think, would be using that full capacity to be able to test a certain recipe. Common sense, it just really doesn't feasibly make sense. So go ahead and start small when you're creating these recipes. Anything your still can really manage, consider even getting another small still. We sell machines that are as little as 3-gallon capacity. You could easily get a 3-gallon still for about $400 to $500 and have that just be your test still. If you have the money to do that, I'd really recommend it. Otherwise, if you have the capacity to do it in your larger size still, I would definitely take advantage of that. Perhaps the biggest tip I could offer for you guys is really use your friends and family as guinea pigs. Blind taste tests are a phenomenal way to really control your recipe and tone it down to what you think the general populace would like. What I do with all my employees and the owner here is basically I create a little Word document, which you'll see up here in a second. And I may have, depending on the spirit, anywhere from 4 to 10 samples for them to try. All of those samples differ one way or the other. Let's say we made a rum. Perhaps sample number 1 is that rum at 160 proof, unaltered. Perhaps sample number 2 is 160 proof rum with a little bit of oak in it. Perhaps sample number 3 is going to be that same rum, but dialed back to 80 proof, 40%. Sample number 4 may be that 80% rum under oak. And then maybe we get a little bit crazy. Maybe sample number 5 is that same rum at 160 proof, but with 1 ounce worth of molasses added directly into the jar. Maybe sample number 6, I drop a little bit of toasted coconut into that rum and see how that transfers over. And the list really goes on from there. We can definitely get a little creative with what our samples are. We're just doing things that we think people would like and seeing how they react to those things. There's a numbering system that goes with this. For me, at least, I go 1 to 10. I have everyone here rate their sample, what they liked. Then I leave a little bit of space there for them to leave notes on the sample. Maybe they thought this one was too bitter. Maybe this one was too strong, so on and so forth. And we sort of dial in from there and see what everyone does by using an averaging system. I take everyone's numbers that I get. We generally have about 5 different inputs on each of our sample tests, and I average out everyone's numbers and I get a base number. What I love about this system too is that it can proceed generationally. So after we take our first sample test and after we average our numbers, I can take the best liked sample out of those averages and then proceed and cultivate that sample from there. Perhaps they liked sample number 5, which had 1 ounce worth of added molasses into that jar of 160 proof rum. That could be our first sample of the next test, and maybe sample number 2 is that same rum with 1 ounce of molasses added, but at 80 proof instead of 160. We could also look at sample number 3 being maybe 2 ounces worth of molasses added instead of 1. Perhaps sample number 4 could do 1 ounce of molasses plus half an ounce worth of honey, and so on and so forth once again. We can take our average from here, put it into a new generation, and then maybe go like by the proof. So let's say they liked the 160 proof with 2 ounces of molasses added. Well, now we can do 160 proof with molasses added plus 150 proof with molasses added plus 140 proof with molasses added. You guys see where I'm going. We can continue to cultivate our recipe until it's dialed down exactly how the general populace, whatever the average number is, would like. And that really helps with our recipe. So this is something I've been doing for just a few, probably 6 months or so, and I've noticed a major increase in the response to my spirits by using this method. I really do recommend you guys use this. If you have friends and family, I mean, no one's gonna pass up a free drink, okay? Go ahead and grab people from the street. If you're courageous enough, get samples. Everyone's got sort of different taste buds, and we even find that here. Like, I'm more of a strong guy. I like my spirit to bite a little bit, right? So I like it a little bit higher than average. Some people here really want sort of almost like juice. They don't really want too much alcohol flavor coming over, and to each their own. But this way, using blind taste test, you can kind of determine what I guess the average would like and be able to make it the way the average would like, which helps you. When I'm creating these samples, I just think of every last variable that I can that would somewhat change the overall body of the spirit. When you go to think about all the raw ingredients you can put in post-infusion, it really opens your mind to the different ways that your spirit can change. You can add fruit juices, sodas. You can add creamers and different types of milk. You can add just straight up, maybe some sort of botanical in there, maybe hard candies. Really, it just goes on and on. Just to mention as a last point, I don't really think it needs saying, but basically only I know what these spirits are, these samples are. I just write it down on a notepad and then just kind of keep it in my pocket and let everyone taste it, compare notes, rate it, maybe add a little something to whatever they're tasting. And then at the end of it, I kind of just explain what each one did. As a continued boiling point to our blind taste tests, one thing I'd highly recommend as far as tips and tricks go for creating a recipe is remember that consistency is key. When we create a batch of spirit, we have heads, hearts, and tails, and all of that spirit, when you have any sort of flavor intertwined, provided it's not a neutral spirit, will have different flavors and different components. It's usually when you blend them together that you get a mix of all that together. That's that well-rounded spirit. But if you're taking blind taste tests to, this is a jar of hearts, jar of tails, this and that, they're probably going to taste a little different. That is the nature of distilling. We're working with a lot of different esters and different compounds that all have different boiling points. So we're hitting them at different points in the still, and that reflects in our jar. So I'd highly recommend to go ahead and keep your spirit consistent for that recipe when you're going through these blind taste tests and R&D. Again, it's probably something that goes without saying, but you're wanting everyone to taste the same thing. Next week on this channel, keep your notifications on, we did a very, very high quality rum. And man, you'll see it in that video. I'm telling you here now, that rum was crazy. The amount it changed, the flavors that changed per certain parts in the run. There was some times where there was such a crazy amount of flavor coming over and different flavors, lots of fruit, tropical flavors coming over, and some that were sweet, but pretty much as neutral like your average rum. So every jar was a little bit different depending on what proof we were at, depending on where we were in the run. Remember during your run to really collect everything that you think would be worth drinking. Try not to get greedy with it and put maybe a little bit of a heads jar into your rest of your blend to try to make up some volume. It usually doesn't end up working up for your benefit. Just try to keep things consistent, as high quality as you can. And then at the end of the day, we're gonna blend that all together. And that spirit, if we're using high quality cuts all the way through, no heads, no foreshots, and only the good parts of our tails, we should be able to create a spirit that has the best well-roundedness that it can, and that's perfect for testing. We take our test from there. As we proceed with final touches, guys, I want to thank you so very much for watching. I want to thank you for all your support, the awesome comments you guys leave. I love the talks back and forth. I love communicating with all you all. I try to respond to everyone. If you haven't already and you're liking this channel, please be sure to like the video, leave us thumbs up. That's going to give us some good ratings on YouTube, which means better content, more accessibility to our channel. It's a little bit of a selfish request, but we would really appreciate it. So be sure to like our video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave any comments that you see fit down below. I also want to take the opportunity to have a shot with you guys. So let's speak on recipes here. This is our pineapple brandy. This was the second generation of this recipe. This goes to show you how important this recipe is. We've done 2 batches of this. Our first was pineapples that were cut up and just fermented like that. We pitched yeast on top of those cut up pineapples, left it at that. The second batch around, we chose to cook these pineapples. We grabbed a cooker, put our pineapples in there, let it cook for, I think, about 45 minutes or so, might have been an hour. And right there, that tells you we took from our first recipe and cultivated it towards a second to see what happens. We weren't expecting anything, okay? We didn't think it would come out better. We didn't think it would come out worse. We just wanted to try a few different approaches to see how that would change our final product. For batch number 1, we put it in a thumper. We had multiple parts where we had infusion baskets, including the thumper being one of them, where we put fresh pineapple as well as pineapple juice into those chambers and try to incorporate as much flavor out of that pineapple we could. For run number 2, we chose to not run through a thumper. We still had an infusion basket filled with pineapple, but we didn't run the thumper. We just wanted to see how that would change our final product. Obviously, we found that batch number 1, we took the right approach. We should have done a thumper, but we wanted to see if that thumper really had so much of an effect on our final product, and it sure did. It brought over a decent bit more. We did have our first run sit in a barrel for 2 months. We were smelling these, tasting these every week, and we found out that was too much. We should have put it out about a month ahead of time. So these are the things we learn. Now we take everything we've learned from the first 2 batches and we find our best strategy and we create for the 3rd batch. So we have a really good understanding in just 2 runs to create the best spirit we can. And here is run number 1, where we really just kind of killed it the first time. It's a little bit over oaked, but it's still amazing. And I want to take a shot with you guys and thank you so much for watching and being supportive. If you've got a recipe you're working on that you maybe want to give another shot, maybe it's been sitting around a little bit, go ahead and crack it open, okay? Take a shot with me, guys. Thank you. Now, as far as final touches go, let's say we've done 2 or 3 generations worth of blind taste tests. What are things we can do to really finalize everything? I would say vodkas and neutral spirits like that are going to benefit the most out of this section. The first thing to bring up is infusions. There's definitely some unique vodkas out there, different things you can do pre-distillation to sort of change maybe the mouthfeel or the overall flavor of that vodka. But I think a lot of vodka, what makes it so unique is going to be post-distillation, and one of those things is infusions. There is a distillery out of Alaska that makes a phenomenal raspberry vodka, and they're using an infusion basket chock full of fresh strawberries to really make their vodka extremely unique. Now on top of that, they're also adding a tiny bit of strawberry extract, mainly for the color. That's something we have to think about too. We can change our vodka's color to really make it sort of eye-popping, to make it unique. Some of it's about presentation. Anyone creating a vodka, I'd really recommend you try using some infusion method into that vodka and seeing what it does. It's a neutral spirit, so it's very susceptible to anything else we bring in. We can definitely keep it like pretty basic and maybe just add some lemons in there, make a lemon vodka, maybe a raspberry vodka, and we can also get really creative. Maybe we can do lemons in one infusion basket and limes in another to make a lemon lime vodka. Maybe we can do oranges in one chamber with cacao beans or something in the other and make like an orange chocolate vodka. We can really get creative with this. It comes down to, once again, trial and error, figuring out what works in terms of flavors, but using an infusion method can transform your vodka into something like nothing else on the market. And in a market oversaturated with different types of liquors and things like that, I don't really ever see the harm in that. Gins are no stranger to infusion. That's how we create a gin usually, is by infusing it with different botanicals. But keep in mind, if you have certain infusion baskets, they have the ability to withhold a lot of that concentrate from the botanical basket within that chamber that your botanicals are sitting, and this can benefit us pretty well. Those are concentrated, they're jam-packed full of flavor, but they also usually, if you're using certain botanicals, have a different color to them. It's something that stands out and just drives more flavor into the bottle. So Again, it takes trial and error to create that recipe that can do that without tarnishing the spirit. But once it's done right, it can be incorporated in to really make your vodka stand out, or your gin. Whiskeys, rums, and everything else in between are no stranger to this. We can incorporate a bunch of different types of berries and fruits into our whiskeys and rums and completely change their flavor. We can look at different types of spices to bring into the mix. We can even look at syrups or different sorts of concentrates that can enter into our bottle post-distillation and incorporate that flavor in that way. Blending also fits into our final touches segment. We talked about a little bit of it during the last segment. Blending can work one of two ways. So we blend those spirits to sort of well-round everything and make it, I guess, sort of universally tasted. I guess everyone's getting the same taste of whatnot. But as we mentioned before, during a run, a lot of your different jars that you collect in will have different flavors. And potentially it's a good idea to maybe use some of these blending jars as toppers instead of just blending them in with the rest of the spirit. Let's say we have hearts jar 1 through 7 go into the blending process all in one big container. And then maybe we have tails jar 1 through 4 in there as well. Now, maybe we end up with jars 5, 6, and 7 of tails having very unique compounds. I've noticed this with some spiced rums that I've done. Sometimes the spices from those runs go way into the very end of the tails, like when we're at like 40 proof. And it's just like a nice topper jar full of cinnamon flavor. So we definitely could blend that in with our spirit, but we have to kind of concentrate on what that would fully do. Sometimes it really is better just to top. So if we added it directly into our blend, it would dilute our blend and then potentially ruin our whole blend. It might take over, right? So again, maybe moderation is key a little bit with some of these jars. Consider taking a few back, making your final product with the best you can, and then from there, maybe this goes into your blind taste test. Maybe we have 3 jars left over and they each have a little bit of a unique compound in them that sort of changed the flavor of your initial blend. Go ahead and add them in one by one, take a blind taste test, see what people like, try a blend of multiple of them in one jar, and so on and so forth, again, until we've finalized everything. Dilutions are also very important in our final touches. We might have a spirit that's jam-packed full of flavor, but maybe we add a little bit too much water to it, we dilute it too much, and it really kills all our flavor that is possible. It's very important to find that fine line. We could definitely take that, let's say 160 proof spirit and bring it down to 120, and it might be good right there. We don't want to go too far down, we don't want to go too high up. We want to find that perfect blend of concentration. We might notice when that spirit is at 40% ABV that it's too doled out in flavor. Maybe you have a run where at 40% ABV, it still has that flavor, but it took that bite away from the 160. Perhaps we even find at 40%, it's still too much. Every spirit is going to be different. You can always add more in. You can't really take it out. Once it's in there, there's no way to separate it. So proof down slowly. I go about 10 proof at a time and proceed from there. Our ending point on final touches is going to be, I just labeled it post-distillation processes. I don't really know how else to mention it. This is mainly just talking about all the minute, random things that you might bring into your process to make it a little bit different. Things like this include, like, some people like to flash age. So they might take their spirit and put it into a cooker and then heat it with a heating element or some other cooking device, and it basically like flash ages really fast. Someone might do that as opposed to a barrel, but it'd be finding that out. It'd be testing both of those realms out and seeing which one actually works for you better. It'd be things like maybe lining your bottle with molasses, or maybe agave, or maybe honey, or maybe a mix of all 3 or multiple. It'd be like adding a dash of brown sugar into each of your bottles as you bottle. The unique things we do there to sort of specialize our product are really going to help it stand out. This video has become sort of more about like how to make your spirit unique than how to create a recipe, but I'm passionate about this craft very much so. And honestly, I think they go hand in hand. It's one thing to create a recipe, but it's one thing to really make that recipe your own and sort of just own it, make it an individual thing that only you know how to do, and you employing certain tactics to really have no one else match it. So I really hope, without going off the rails too much, I did an okay job of helping you guys create that recipe and make it your own. I wanted to thank you so very much for watching. Once again, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, guys. We will see you next video, and have a good one.